Welcome to the Locksmith Security Network. LSN is your powerful resource, hosted by Wayne Winton for all things locksmith and security. Alrighty, we are live for the Locksmith Security Network podcast, the #1 podcast in security today, and I am with Tim Keller today. Tim is with River Valley Lock, and Tim has a really unique story, and I really wanted to highlight this because I think it's a really common thing that happens in our industry where people from firefighting and law enforcement and military kind of gravitate towards this industry. And so I really wanted to have you on here to tell your story and help others who are in that transition period from doing their normal 9-to-5 job in those professions that we really need, obviously, but kind of making that transition into becoming a full-time locksmith. So Tim, tell us a little bit about yourself and where you're at and how you got started here.
Yeah, thanks for the introduction there, Wayne. I'm currently in the middle of the process, so I can't claim to have any great insight into the end of the process, but I can tell you how I got where I am. And so I'm currently a trading locksmith, member of ALOA, and I'm, operating a small business while I'm working my, well, not exactly 9-to-5, but my 9-to-5, so to speak. Full-time, I work as a firefighter. And I think I, kind of fell into it like a lot of other people did, both in firefighting and locksmithing. I started with an interest in the fire department, in forcible entry, making entry into people's homes. And I was noticing that we were doing a lot of damage in the process, which is a very common thing in the industry. If you've ever had a fire department or a police department break into your house for an emergency, you know what I'm talking about. We make a mess. And that was a need that was identified by our community. And so I was able to step up and develop a program to, we call it through the lock forcible entry. So we're basically removing the lock hardware from the door rather than blasting the door off the hinges. And so that was kind of where I got the start in locksmithing, believe it or not. I started to realize that as I started to dig into the locks and into the guts and the innards of these locks, I went, oh, I can do this. So that's what I just started to do. I started by, developing my skill set, both by talking to other local professionals. There's some folks here in the Twin Cities who have been extremely helpful. Steve out in Hastings in particular has been a real big help to me. And with a little bit of mentorship and a little bit of, YouTube University, honestly, I was able to get my feet wet. And a lot of it was, just like for those of you who are looking at transitioning into locksmithing from a uniform profession, as well as I do, that a lot of it is just figuring it out as you go. And that is fundamentally a lot of what I do. I make a lot of phone calls. The biggest things that I've found to be helpful to me are, like I said, networking with other professionals.
If you are interested in learning about locksmithing and especially access control, check out the classes that we have to offer for on-demand electronic access control installation for beginners. This is going to be the first class. It covers how to cut in electronic strikes, how to mount basic magnetic locking systems, and much more. See the link below for you.
I am a member of ALOA, and that's been helpful with some of the local folks here to, kind of get that foot in the door and start dialogue. And then just developing those relationships with, your manufacturers, your distributors, all the folks in the industry, people like Wayne, Facebook groups, things like that. Just really reaching out and leveraging those relationships. I've made plenty of phone calls in the middle of a job and said, hey, I got this thing off the door. Now what do I do? So I'm not too proud to admit that. But you know what? It's leveraging your resources. And yeah, sometimes you get in a little bit further than you realize before you're done, but you figure it out. And that's, if nothing else, that's what everybody in uniform professions is really good at. So I think it's a natural transition.
Right. Well, this is a great opportunity because, like I said, there are so many people that make that transition. I would say the vast majority of the locksmith and security community is former law enforcement, military, first responder. I don't know how it happens. And this was one of the questions that Nick actually asked me not too long ago with part of the campaign. People don't ever say in school when you're a little kid, what do you want to be when you grow up? I want to be a firefighter. I want to be a policeman. I want to be, this or that. Nobody ever says locksmith. Like it's not even on anybody's radar. And then plop, here we are, and you just kind of get sucked into it and you kind of just land in it. And then once you find it, you just really kind of uncover the layers, and it just really starts to appeal to people. Number one, because, like for me, I was running heavy equipment. My back was not doing very well. It was beating me up, and the oil field just takes people. It takes young bodies and chews them up and grinds them up and spits them out the other end. And you're really never the same again. And I saw this and I was like, well, heck, you know what? I can sit at a table and I can repin locks when I'm 65, 70 years old. I can do this. Mm-hmm. So, it's amazing how people get here. And it's just really amazing. And I think the industry itself does a very poor job of conveying this to the vocational schools and actually letting people know that this is a real trade and a real industry. So that's really what the mission behind the podcast is, to give people an understanding of what it is that we do. How do we do it? Why do we do it? What's going on? And when you first hear locksmith, like what do you think of? Like, what's the first thing that came to your mind when you heard locksmith, before you started this?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing for me was I was like, oh, well, they're changing door hardware, right? They're pulling deadbolt off, putting a new one on, and that was, and I had some, exposure through, various YouTubers and whatnot of, oh, lockpicking, that's probably a part of it too, right? And that was kind of the extent of my knowledge on it. And then as I dug into it, I started to realize, and I think this might answer your question a little bit as far as how we all landed into this role, but it's problem solving, right? That's the core of locksmithing, in my opinion. And that is really what lends itself so nicely to all these uniform professions, right? Like fire, police, EMS, anybody, military, even, heavy equipment, right? Like you were doing, I'm sure, in the oil field, plenty of problem solving that you had to figure this out right now, or you're not going to, get paid today or, or what have you. We don't, there's no 912, right? Like we're all really good problem solvers. Right. And that's what's so appealing about locksmithing is every different job, every different door is potentially a different challenge. There are days where you're undoing a lot of Phillips head screws and putting them back in, and that's how that goes. But there are definitely days where you're looking at stuff and going, boy, how does that fit back together? I better figure that out.
You got it apart, and now what?
Yeah. You just have to hope you don't have any extra bolts when you're done, right? But no, that's I think the core of the reason you see so many folks from those lines of work ending up in locksmithing is they start to realize, and for anybody who's on the fence about it, that's really what it is. It's a lot of problem solving, and that's, it helps keep the brain engaged, and it's also not completely destructive on your back and your shoulders and everything else like, the rest of the jobs are.
Yeah. I'm sure firefighting, you guys stuff around giant heavy suits, all that stuff, it can definitely take its wear and tear. Plus, not to mention your schedule is probably a nightmare. When you get to this, hey, you'll be prepared for the emergency calls, but when you do start getting established, you can taper down and start scheduling things out and kind of do a 9 to 5 type of thing.
Absolutely, yeah. I definitely have a preference for scheduling things.
So let's back up and let's take that first step. Like, did they have a class, or like how did you start with that gain entry process, that forcible gain entry process? And then what was the next step to kind of get you towards, hey, there's a less destructive, smoother, more covert way to accomplish this task?
Sure. So a big part of it was there is a class today. That class, there were some folks who had started to develop it. If people are interested, Rise Above Fire Training was kind of the originator of some of this stuff. I have one of their tools actually in my tool closet over here. But they were kind of the originators of it as a concept. It didn't have a whole lot of widespread adoption. They were in Michigan, I believe. And so here in Minnesota, where I am, there wasn't a whole lot of this type of entry. It was just the Halligan and the axe, or the irons as we call it. And so, you're just breaking things basically, which is, don't get me wrong, it's fun, but it's not great for the end user. Right. So I started to do some digging on it, and with the help of some folks who had gone before me, but then also folks on the internet, a lot of the pen testers out there, right? I know that some of them get a bad name from some of the locksmiths out there because there's, spoiling trade secrets and things like that. I have some opinions on that I can share, but the fact of the matter is the cat's out of the bag at this point. And so those folks were really instrumental to me in developing some of these programs. Companies that sell some of these tools, like the Sparrows and folks like that, right? They're not, maybe a locksmith tool per se, but they're tools that we can use in our industry, in the fire industry, to make entry into a room or a building and not destroy a bunch of stuff. I mean, and yeah, we can grouse all we want as locksmiths about, oh, well, this stuff used to be secret. And that's true. But the fact of the matter is it's not anymore. And we're in the information age and we need to act like it. And that's one thing that I've been a little bit puzzled by, after I joined ALOA. It feels sometimes like the industry, and I know I'm picking on, the industry that you're on the board of, but
not yet, just on the board of South.
Well, on the board though, so you still count, right? You're still there. So I'll pick on it gently, but no, I think ALOA could do a lot better at embracing some of this stuff. I hear a lot of locksmiths grouse about, oh, the cat's out of the bag. And even when I'm doing these fire trainings, I've talked to some locksmiths and some of them are interested and sure, I'll come along and help out and, want to see what this is about. And other locksmiths that say, well, there's a lot of kind of, trade secrets I don't want to share. And it's like, I'm not asking you to share anything that's not out there already. And P.S., I'm not sharing this to, Joe Public either. These are fire department, folks. I'm just not taking anybody off the street and teaching them, but YouTube is, and a lot of that information is out there. And so I think we as an industry are at kind of an inflection point of, do we take these folks who are learning these skills on the internet and through friends and, communities out there, and do we say, hey, there's a cool opportunity to take those skills, refine them and turn that into a career? Or do we say, oh, you've learned that the wrong way and tell them to take a hike, and those are kind of our options as I see them. And I definitely have preference for taking them on and bringing them into the fold and, helping them become a trading locksmith because there's room here for everybody.
Next, we've got commercial door and frame installation. This is going to give you a complete idea of not just how locks operate and how the locking systems work, but how doors operate as well. Operating as a firefighter or first responder or law enforcement, having a good concept or good idea about how doors and frames are installed and how they function will give you a great idea on how you can use that in your locksmithing career and how these systems are set up in the field if you are trying to defeat them. Check out the door and frame installation class. Click the link below.
Yeah, definitely. And that's kind of some ways that we can navigate this. Certainly, you know me from some of my YouTube videos, and I definitely catch a lot of flack in the industry. And so, here's kind of how I drew my line in the sand is when I first started, I'm like, man, this is really, really cool information. I just want to help other people out because back when I started, it was like 2014, somewhere right in there. And I was just filming it because I was like, I need to remember this. I just beat my head against the side of this van, until my eyes bleed, trying to figure this complex situation out because lockpicking lawyer and all these people didn't exist. Like there wasn't anybody or anything out there. And there wasn't any information. I'm like, man, I just spent all this time and finally figured this out. I'm going to document this so I know how to do it again. And then I started seeing other people in like chat rooms and community places saying, hey, I have this problem. And I'm like, well, ding, I've got a light bulb. Hey, I just had this problem. Here's the video. Here's how I solved it. And so that's how it kind of started. But then I started getting some flack from the people in the industry. They're like, well, this is kind of, proprietary information or secret information. We don't really do that in our trade and in our industry. And even my mentor was, it was so held under wraps that literally when he was training to become a locksmith, the locksmith that was teaching him how to become a professional locksmith would put a rag over a cylinder as he's using a shim, trying to shim that cylinder open, like from one locksmith to the next. We can't find that technique out. And I don't know whether it was just like job security or, they just didn't want that out. But surely one tech training another tech needs to be able to see that information. So that's kind of how close to the breast that it was held. And that older generation is having a really, really hard time with it. Everybody's going to have their own opinions on that. And once again, where I drew my line in the sand is I don't want to show people things that could really cause some major problems. For example, one of the things that I disagree with Lockpicking Lawyer with, and by the way, he is a fantastic lockpicker. He really is picking these locks. I get asked that question all the time, and very, very talented. He's a very, very talented individual. Where it comes off as not the best situation is showing people how to open safes, showing people how to bypass, higher grade security. Your average little lock that you can rake open in 5 seconds, or doing a credit card shim. I mean, those are tricks that have been around, for years and years and years. And even before the internet existed, those were things that were getting shared around. But if a parent has taken the time to go out to the store and buy a small safe and put prescription medication in there if their child has a drug habit, or just to keep it away from children in general, or a firearm, mostly, and they're not going to do research on what the best safe in the world is, because they're just trying to accomplish a task of, hey, I need to be a responsible adult. I need to keep this away from my kid, and here's how I'm going to do it. And when you show how to do bypass methods on those type of things, well, now you have who's watching YouTube, first of all, the teenagers, right, in that age bracket that are getting into the things that you're trying to keep them out of. And so if you're showing that can lead to, what if that kid ends up shooting his friend or himself? You know what I mean? Like, you can get really dark really quick. Or this kid just came back from rehab and now he's addicted again, or overdose on medication, or something along those lines. And I don't know if there's any actual real legal consequences that can actually come of that. It's like, I hear this all the time from the counterpart is, well, you can't blame the knife for somebody stabbing somebody, or gun control, however you want to look on that. And I don't want to start a whole big thing on that either. By the same token,
we'll be here for hours, Wayne.
Yeah, we'll be here for hours. Where we're going. But by the same token, me personally, I don't want to contribute to that. And so that's where I draw the line in the sand. And I show some basic methods, like how to open a car. Okay, if the manufacturer puts out a video on how to use their product, then I think that's a pretty safe bet, right? If and like I said, if it's like safes and things related to that, yeah, that belongs in a private vetted situation where you're sharing amongst professionals, and that's more the route that I'd like to go with that. And everybody has their own line, and not everybody agrees with my line. However, it's my camera, it's my time. And if I want to put that together to try and help some people, which is the motivation behind it, really, it is not views and likes and any of that. It's to really genuinely help people. That's why I started, and that's why I do what I do now. That's where I want to go with it. I can't control what other people do, like Lockpicking Lawyer, once again, very talented. I don't agree with all the things he does, but here we are. There's millions and millions of views on his stuff, and he's doing it for profit. He's running a covert instrument company, and that is what it is. There's not a whole lot that we can do about that. But
no, I think that's a fair take. And the other piece I'll tack onto that, I think, is the only caveat I would have to for example, the cheap safe opening and things like that is, and I'll tie it back to like the software industry. Yeah. In the software industry, there are things, if you're not familiar, there are things called bug bounties. So if somebody finds a bug in a piece of software, then the person who finds it can call the company who developed that software and say, hey, I found this bug. Here's an opportunity for you to patch it, for you to fix it before I release this into the wild. Right. And some companies do it, some don't. And the ones that don't are generally shamed by the release of whatever vulnerability they got found. And that would be my only hope with things like the Lockpicking Lawyer picking open, or not even picking open, but bypassing a cheap safe, is that it would be lovely if the industry would adapt to that and fix those problems with those safes. Now, that being said, is First Alert or for whoever are these little fire safe, Sentry Safe, are they going to change how they design? Probably not. They might. They have in some cases, but that would be my only caveat to that. Is I think there is a value in that information getting to the manufacturer specifically. The unfortunate thing is sometimes they need to be shamed into fixing the problem instead of just fixing it because it's the right thing to do.
Right. Right. Yeah. And there's an avenue to go about that as well is, hey, did you let the manufacturer know? Did they flat out ignore you? And then, okay, well, where are we at with that here? But once again, I'd really much rather focus on where did you go next? So who did you start watching? Who were the first videos that you saw? Where did you kind of channel that? And then how did you come across? Because I am on the board and I am running for president this year. And what I want to do is I want to talk to people like you who made the conscious choice to go in the correct direction and become a professional and get the proper business licensing and all the things that you need to do. But we need to understand, where did that come from and where, because if you found it that way, somebody else is going to find that too. And hundreds of other people are going to find it too. So where did you go next?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, a big part of it for me was just searching on YouTube and looking for, locksmith business ideas, suggestions, recommendations. And I want to say it was Mr. Lock or something like that. I'm forgetting his name, but there's a gentleman, Mr. Locksmith. Is that it? Yeah. He runs a YouTube channel that has a bunch of industry targeted information. And I was able to learn a lot about some of the basics of the industry from him and from some other YouTubers whose names I'm forgetting. And I apologize to you if I forgot you, but I've found some of your videos. They've been very helpful to me. It's really been a kind of a group effort, if you will. The one thing I was, I guess, hoping for when I joined ALOA was to see more educational content that was available. One thing I wasn't super thrilled about was that I felt, in some respects, I feel like I've paid money in order for the privilege of being able to pay more money to learn things. And I get it. Things cost money. And it's not free to produce content and develop content and all of that. And I completely understand that. Right. That being said, I think there are probably tools we could leverage to develop that. But I digress. It was a lot of YouTube learning and then just starting to do things hands-on. A lot of it was simply trial and error and talking to other local locksmiths. That was probably the biggest help to me, was finding someone local and really working with them. And ALOA can be a great tool for that. I will say that's been very helpful. I've connected with a couple of locksmiths in the area and been able to kind of start to develop relationships with them through ALOA. Whereas if I were a one-man shop with, real limited history and no membership, it would be difficult for me to make inroads with some of these folks. And understandably so, right? They don't know me from anyone else. And all they know is I have a business license. So that extra legitimacy, I think, really helps to say, hey, no, I'm serious about this. I want to do this the right way.
Right. Yeah. And that really, it makes a lot of sense. And that is one of the big things that I'm really campaigning on and trying to, really stand on this year is there is a way to where we can get that content filmed and at least some basic stuff. Let's bring some manufacturers in. Let's have some of the, representatives from, like the leashy lock picking tools and things like that are really revolutionizing the industry. And let's put some of those out there in some bite-sized pieces done under a paywall, under a password, and teach people that way and start really bringing that knowledge to a spot where it's easily consumable, because the days of paper and people sitting in classes, those are really gone. And I keep trying to explain that if the association's main source of income and the biggest things that they have to offer are networking and education, I can't say it enough. Those are now taken over by the internet and chat groups and even, Facebook groups and all these other things. You can get that networking and you can get that information through other channels. So we have to adapt to what the customer wants. And you're one of those customers. And there are hundreds and thousands of people who are just like you, who are like, man, I love serving, but by the same token, I got to figure out what I'm going to do with my career and what's going to be best for me. How do I get this? And if there's no presence The fact that you found other YouTubers before the association itself, I think, is a huge problem, and it shouldn't be that way. It should be the other way around. When you go to look for locksmithing information and how to become a professional, the Associated Locksmiths of America should be the number one thing that pops up, and it should really be direct to that. So how did you actually hear about ALOA? Who did you hear it from, and then when did you start going down that avenue?
Well, I kind of circled around it for a while, various YouTube rabbit holes. I went down kind of a Deviant Olaf and like the pen testing rabbit hole for a while, learned a bunch of stuff from those guys. And I know they don't have the greatest reputation in the locksmithing world, but I learned a lot from some of those guys. And I think it's really, really valuable information that they have to offer. The ways in which they offer it can be discussed later, but I do think there's a lot of really good information that's accessible to folks because of those guys. Yeah. And so that kind of led me into, okay, what is, how do I become a locksmith? I live in a state that doesn't have any licensing. And so I started just Googling around locksmithing licensing. And then I found, ALOA, who are these guys? They have certifications and licensure and, what's that about? So I started digging into that a little bit. And that was where I discovered it, was by trying to look for a locksmith license for myself, which my state doesn't offer. And that was kind of where I landed. So that was what got me in the door with ALOA. And when I started out, I wasn't super keen on it. I didn't have a lot of income from the business to do it. So I just kind of started rolling with it. And then once I kind of got my feet under me a little bit, I joined on and started to, be a member and get involved. And I think the big thing for me too is the business is not, I'm not raking in the dough by any means. I have a full-time job that pays my bills. And I don't have the ability to travel to Chicago or wherever else they're hosting, even Vegas. The flights are pretty cheap, but I don't really want to sit on Spirit with my knees in my throat. But a lot of these places that these conferences are, it's going to cost me between the conference fees, hotel, travel, in the thousands of dollars. And that's a big outlay for education that in some cases I can access through inexpensive or free means by networking with local locksmiths, checking things out on YouTube, talking to manufacturers, all of that. And so that's been the biggest hurdle for me as far as getting involved in any of the in-person stuff with ALOA, is just trying to figure that cost benefit out for myself.
Right. So there is a need. Wouldn't it be better if ALOA had those foundations laid to where you could just go ahead and, okay, now I've joined, where's the starting package? Where's the like a fundamentals type of thing? Where can we start? And then you can kind of branch off. Do I want to do automotive? Do I want to do residential? Do I want to do commercial? Do I want to start looking into safe work? Where do I want to go with my career? And then start branching out and be able to consume some of that video content on demand. People don't really realize how much that costs. And I remember even for me to go to my first show I ever went to was SAVTA Safe Tech, Safe and Vault Technicians Association. And by the time I figured out the expenses, it's a week. I'm gone for a week. So it's 5 or 6 days there. And then I've got lost income, right? So if I figure back then I was probably making $1,000 a day, I got to be gone for 7 or 8 days. There's $7,000 or $8,000 in lost income, which is a huge factor when you're first starting out. Not to mention in your position, you'd have to literally take time off of work. So can you even get that time? And guess what? You, Tim, don't get to go on a family vacation this year because your family vacation is now the association meeting. And then you figure in a plane ticket, hotel room, you got to eat, you got to have a couple meals. Usually they'll provide lunch for you, but you still got to have a breakfast and dinner type of thing. It was $10,000 by the time I figured out what the investment is. And if we want to bring more people into this association, there has to be that balancing act of these people can't afford it all the time. And an on-demand option with instructors who are willing to do so, and teach their content in that format should be allowed to do so in a way that works both for the end user, adding more value to you and adding more value to the association as well. If you were given the choice, hey, do you want to watch these YouTube videos? And kind of one of the biggest problems about YouTube University is it's about 80% garbage and maybe 20% or even less, maybe even a 90-10 of actual good quality content out there. If you were given both of those options with your membership, surely you would have picked the on-demand option, right?
Oh, yeah, that'd be a no-brainer. I mean, for me, I couldn't tell you what percentage, but countless YouTube videos I've clicked out of 3 minutes in, like, okay, this is garbage. I'm not listening to this. I'm not watching this. It's real. And I was able to, fortunately, with some guidance from folks I've spoken with locally and things like that, I was able to kind of sort through the wheat from the chaff and find what I needed. But yeah, it was not easy or curated by any stretch of the imagination. So to have something that is handed over to you as, hey, welcome to the association, here's how you get started, that would be huge. I mean, that would really have leapfrogged my initial start. And very honestly, as someone who was looking at membership earlier than I bought membership, that would have pushed me to buy earlier and start becoming a member sooner, because I waited until I had my feet under me to join the association, because I didn't see anything about onboarding and how to get started. So I just waited. And I'm glad I did. Unfortunately, that's the reality that we're in right now. But I am glad that I waited.
Yeah, and that's what we have to do. As board members, we need to be listening to the end user, to the members, to the consumers, and say, the philosophy so far has kind of been, hey, we're going to do this and throw it against the wall, and hopefully it sticks and it produces a return on investment when they try different educational opportunities. And rather than do that, I think it's much more effective. If you listen to any business books, you find the problem and then you solve the problem, as opposed to creating a solution and then hoping that it meets the end user's problems needs. You can answer all of these questions by simply putting out a poll or just asking people like you, which is exactly why I've got you on today. Because again, there are hundreds and thousands of people who are right there in your position, or if they're not there right now, by the time this video rolls out a couple years down the road, they might be, and they're going to hear this and they're going to say, okay, well, here's some new avenues that we can go down. And hopefully by then we can really have that on-demand platform ready to roll out, where it is just like an arrow that gives you a roadmap. You are here. You want to be here. Here's the path. And it just,
I would love if in 2 to 5 years, this YouTube video or this when it's on, or the podcast, what have you, was totally deprecated and there's no need for this discussion anymore. That would be great. if that comes out of this, then I'm very, very happy about that. Because that's I think, and this is something that we say in the fire service here in the US, is the American fire service is 200 years of tradition unimpeded by progress. And sometimes I think locksmithing is the same way. I stumbled into a trade that shares a lot with my current job. So, but no, I think we have a really cool opportunity here to really seize the moment and push that forward. Because again, like we talked about before, these people on YouTube and wherever else are going to put out this information, whether we like it or not. And it's up to us if we want to control the flow of some of this information and say, hey, that might be a way to do that, but here's the right way. It's a really cool opportunity, I think, and any industry that doesn't adapt is going to have a hard time in the future. And I think between all the electronic stuff and everything else, I mean, I don't know if you're familiar with the Minnesota law that just passed about keys.
Mm-mm.
So the Minnesota legislature, well, I shouldn't say just passed, it just went into effect. They passed it a couple of years ago, but they banned lead in keys, which sounds great in theory. Turns out 99% of the brass that we use in keys has a small amount of lead in it. And guess what? That small amount is bigger than the amount that are in all these keys. So we're currently dealing with that in Minnesota. And, it would be awesome to see ALOA pop in and be like, hey, guys, here's a possible solution. Here's a way forward. I've been calling manufacturers myself to see, hey, do you have any information on lead content? It's trying to solve these problems. I'm happy to do it, but it would be awesome if there was somebody ahead of the curve on some of this stuff and helping out with it. Same thing goes for electronic access control here in the state of Minnesota. There's a power limited technician license for low voltage stuff. And it requires, I think it's 6,000 hours of on the job training.
Wow.
And so for somebody in my position, it's almost impossible to get into electronic access control. So I would have to basically quit my day job, go be an apprentice for 3 years. And that's not something that I can afford to do at this point in my life.
Right.
So, maybe that's another thing that, whether we can develop trainings for that or, work with legislatures and things to, hey, here's another avenue you could take. I think there are some interesting opportunities, but those are just a couple of Minnesota specific issues that we're dealing with right now.
Yeah, that's pretty crazy. I did not know about that. That's good information to know too. What would some other things be like if you could just wave a magic wand, Tim's magic wand, and the association is tailored to Tim? What would be some other things like would a podcast, like a monthly podcast or quarterly podcast, really kind of help out? Or what about like a monthly Zoom meeting where we just send a massive notification out to the members, and there's just a bunch of members there, and we have representatives from manufacturers to talk about new products and the latest and greatest in the industry. So you are highly educated about the latest and greatest about everything going on in the industry. Do those sound like some really good options?
Yeah, I think actually you mentioned podcast, and that spurred another memory for me. The gentleman who run the Three Tumblers podcast, I listened to every single episode of that podcast when I was getting started. There was a lot of good information in there as well. Tyler J. Thomas, and I can't remember the other gentleman's names, but he's stuck in my brain for some reason. But yes, an industry podcast. I mean, again, I leveraged their podcast to get started. Having the official ALOA podcast would be great. The YouTube, or Teams meeting, what have you. I could go either way on that. I'm not big on big groups of people on an internet meeting because everyone tries to talk at the same time, and then it turns into a whole thing. But having manufacturers having a webcast or what have you, where manufacturers and industry experts come in and say, hey, I've been doing XYZ for I've been doing master systems for 35 years, and here are some tips and tricks I picked up along the way. Stuff like that would be great, or even here's how I do small masters, here's how I do big, some of that kind of content would I think really be helpful. The other thing for me is just that kind of, I don't want to say fixed, but a fixed resource of some kind, whether that's on YouTube, behind a locked, behind a paywall, or some private, whatever it works out to be, but some video access that we can have as members that says, hey, here's the top 30 most common things you're going to do as a locksmith, and here are some ways to do those things, whether it's master keying systems, whether it's basic door hardware questions, what have you. And then having those updated, and kept up to date. That's always the problem with anyone who's ever taken an online training, especially those of you in public safety, knows that sometimes those online trainings are a little out of date. So you got to stay on top of that stuff, unfortunately. But I think those would be the biggest things for me, because I'm not in a location where I can physically attend a lot of these conferences and a lot of these trainings. A lot of them are down in Texas and places that, it's a bit of a trip for me. So if they moved around more, that might be helpful. I don't know. It's going to be inconvenient for someone. So I just happen to be the someone.
Right. And then at the end of the day, my philosophy on this is, do you know who really benefits most from this, from a more educated technician? Is the end user, the customer. Instead of, like you said, where, hey, I took something apart and then I don't know if I can get it back together, or jumping into something that you're not really familiar with because you were denied access and you didn't have access to the proper information to work on that particular unit. I hate when people practice on customers' doors. Like we need to come back and get a little bit more education. And we're at that transition point where, well, yes and no. We got to have the education set up and formatted so that it can be accessed, so that we can go that route. But
the education has to exist for me to take advantage of it, right?
Exactly. And I'm not trying to pick on you. I mean, I've taken things, I've jumped in way over my head, and by the time I figured it out, it was too late anyways. But we were able to use the networking, and we were able to do it properly and do it professionally and get that customer going again. But wouldn't it be such a better opportunity? Like if you could see the arrows pointing, like the association offers on-demand education that the locksmith can access anywhere in the world behind a secure paywall. And then they do better work for their customer. And now the entire industry is raised, and we are seen as more professional, and less people get scammed by scammers because there is public relation, because the techs are more educated, because they do know what they're doing more. And all of it helps. Every single arrow points to the other one, and it's this giant circle that continues to gain momentum and really elevates the entire industry as a whole. Like that's where I really feel things are headed and need to head that way. And ALOA has such a great opportunity right now to just grab the bull by the horns, put a saddle on this thing, come up with some rules and guidelines, and really just ride this out.
No, 100%. And I think that's, and you know, I don't want anyone listening to this to think that I just go around practicing on customers' doors, but as a matter of practice, but no, but that was a real situation that I encountered where I ran into a problem and I wasn't sure how to solve it. And being able to make a phone call or look up a resource online that I know is reliable and valuable and all of that versus making a panic phone call to one of my distributors saying, hey, you know how to do this, right? I would much prefer that. Don't get me wrong. That's, you know, but the state of the industry right now is unless you can apprentice under someone who's actively a trading locksmith, it's almost impossible to pick up some of this knowledge, and a lot of it's tribal knowledge. And that's, you know, I actually happen to have a bachelor's degree in business administration, and that's one of the biggest pitfalls that companies run into. And, you know, we're not a company, we're an industry, but it's the same kind of problem. When someone has this tribal knowledge and they sit on it and they hold on to it, that knowledge never gets passed down. All of a sudden, no one knows how to do that thing in 30 years, or when that person retires, or God forbid gets hit by a bus, that information dies with them. And that's not a tenable situation for an industry like this. We really need to be in a position where we don't have to keep reinventing wheels, because right now, I guarantee you I've reinvented ways to do things that someone else has figured out a better way to do 10 years ago, you know, and that's just the state of the industry, unfortunately. And I would love to see that change, because that's, you know, part of the appeal coming from the first responder background is I get to troubleshoot things, but I would sure like to troubleshoot actual problems.
Right. Right. Yeah. And like I said, I'm not picking on you. I've done every single locksmith who is out there listening to this has done the same exact thing. Every single person has opened up a can of worms and gone, "Whoo, boy, we're really going to work on those problem solving skills. That muscle is going to get exercised today." And hopefully
Absolutely.
you do have some telephone numbers or some other resources. So let's walk a little bit further down that road. So you joined ALOA. What other resources did you find? What kind of groups and what local locksmiths? Like, where did you go from there?
Yeah, no, it was mostly largely it was ALOA, and then just talking to local folks here. The next kind of what I see on the horizon is doing things like joining the Chamber of Commerce, getting networked in with some other local businesses. You know, I know you've mentioned previously on the podcast realtors, things like that, and developing some of those business relationships. The big one for me was getting into the distributors after kind of developing my sense of where I live in the business, and developing those relationships with those vendors was really, really crucial for me, because they have a lot of really good resources. You know, I'm very fortunate. We have a couple of really good distributors here in the Twin Cities. They have trainings that they put on, you know, either free or relatively inexpensive. And obviously they're local to me, so that's very convenient, which I like. But there's a lot of good content there available. And so whether it's put on by a manufacturer and it's kind of a glorified sales pitch sometimes, but that's usually the free lunch ones, you know, it's the way it goes. I'll take it.
Yeah, you're not going to get a manufacturer rep that comes out and says, "Hey, here's the problems with our product, and we're going to highlight that." That's not going to happen.
No, I don't blame them. I get it. but no, there's been a lot of good content from that. And then for me going forward, it's really just starting to develop and rather continuing to develop those skills and build that out and reach a point where I feel more comfortable and more confident in what I'm doing every day. And developing the you know, the hardware on hand, things like that. You know, I've had to make runs to distributors mid job. I know everyone else has too. But as I develop, you know, my skills and my understanding of how things are supposed to work and what things might not work the way they're supposed to, I'm going to have a better catalog in my head of, okay, I should have this and this and this and this on hand. But things like that too, you know, that's a relatively easy handout to develop. Hey, if you're going to be doing residential jobs, here's a list of spare parts you might want to have on hand. You know, super simple. And I was given that by another local locksmith, but it'd be cool if the industry had, or if the association rather had something available like that.
Yeah. I mean, I see nothing but opportunity here. Like,
Mhm.
just what you were talking about. Hey, here's some frequently asked questions. Here's what you're going to run into on the job. And then listening to podcasts, you're going to hear a lot of those stories. Like, I do the Locksmith documentary, and, people watch that and they're like, oh man, I didn't know you guys did all this stuff. And the pitfalls that we run into, I show the mistakes. I show
Mhm.
what in the heck? I've done this for over a decade and I don't know what is happening here, and that really helps people out too. But it would be nice if they had some structured business classes as well. Where did you get the most information on how to set up your business, how to structure things, what vehicles to buy, what tools to get? Where did you get that information from?
A lot of the tool information was either on my own or from discussing with other locksmiths.
Mhm.
The business side of things, I was fortunate to have a background in business, and so I
Mhm.
have some formal education in that area. So I was able to develop it out. It's an LLC. I have a DBA, all that happy stuff. I've been able to kind of work through that. I've got shirts, a couple hats. I have a personal vehicle that I also drive for the business, so I got a couple magnets I can put on the side
Mhm.
to really show that, hey, I'm I'm trying here, I'm
Mhm.
official, at least as
Right.
official as it gets. But developing that out has been really key. I think that's something that a lot of folks are maybe nervous when they're starting out to, oh, oh, do I need a logo? Do I need a shirt? Those things I think are really key for folks getting started, especially when you show up on a job and you've got a shirt that has your company name on it. That speaks volumes to what you're doing. I see you wearing one right now. I think mine's in the laundry right now, but
Yeah.
but yeah, I mean, ball caps, shirts, what have you, those sorts of things. Even something as silly as business cards. It's they feel a little old fashioned at times, but I think having that really helps people understand that yes, you are serious, yes, you are professional, and being able to put, I got my ALOA membership on my website. It's up there. So having those things, having those pieces in place. As far as business education, there's a lot of good local resources for folks who are starting out who don't have the background that I've got, whether it's your local chamber of commerce. In Minnesota, we have the Small Business Administration that actually has a ton of really good resources on their website. They have low cost and free clinics and how to set up your business and how to develop things, connections like that. So there's a lot of really good resources available to folks for that online. I don't specifically outside of the state, I'm not sure offhand, but I know there's a lot out there. Chambers of commerce tend to be a pretty good resource from my understanding, but
Oh yeah, yeah. That's like I do business coaching for people, and that's like the number one thing that you got to start at. Like if you have your basics down, where you have an attorney, you have a CPA, you filed your business with the Secretary of State, you've got your sales tax license. Like after those real basic foundations are laid, how do I get my business out there? Especially with Google My Business listings just disappearing left and right, the locksmith industry is just under a microscope that's red hot right now. So finding other sources like the Chamber of Commerce and BNI meetings, going out and talking with the lunch and learns, the realtors. Most of the people that are at those chamber meetings is going to be realtors and bank managers, and that's going to be exactly who your number one candidate is.
Mhm.
Gyms, there's a lot of people that run gyms that are there, car dealerships. Like those are the people that you want to know, and those are some of the
Mhm.
first jobs and some of the first big clients that I got was directly through the chamber.
Absolutely. And one other thing that people might not think of, I know for the fire department, when we have fire after the fire, we have a list of board up companies that will call
Mhm.
to board up the house.
Yeah,
That might be something that folks maybe haven't thought about, but fire departments, we make entry into buildings a lot more than we put out a fire in a building.
yeah.
And as far as I'm aware, there aren't a lot of departments that are handing out or passing out information or keys, or not keys, but cards for locksmiths and things like that after they break into somebody's house.
Hmm.
That might be an opportunity for folks to grow that. Another thing that I'm doing because of my background, I'm doing a lot of fire training and education surrounding forcible entry and things like that. And I talk about being a locksmith there, and I'll hand out cards to people who are curious about it. It's a little less, bit of a slower role on that side,
Right.
but that's something that locksmiths could work on too. Is if they want to develop a training program for their fire department about ways that you can get into a house without blowing the door off the hinges. that's something you can work with. And if anybody wants to do that or develop that for their fire department, they don't have the information or aren't quite comfortable, I'm more than happy to help anybody who's interested in that. I think that's a real, growth area for the fire service in particular. And I think that's something that locksmiths can really bring uniquely to that problem.
Rather than focusing on the things that YouTube has to offer, you can take professional quality education from an ALOA ACE certified instructor. That means we have gone through the ALOA certification for instructors training to show you the best information under private, vetted, on-demand courses. Check out the link below for more information.
Yeah, and what a great way. That was I did that years ago. Is I contacted the local police and local fire department, and I was like, you guys are never going to be able to do my job, and I don't want that. And they actually don't want to do it either. Like, unless there's a life at stake, they don't want to open up that vehicle. It's not like they're taking jobs away. People think, oh, well, they're going to take our jobs away. It's actually the complete opposite of that. They don't want the liability. They don't want the lawsuit. They don't want all that stuff. But there are certain cases where if there's a life at risk, if there's a dog in the car, if there's a baby in the car, somebody passed out, or welfare checks, checking on grandma, being able to, covertly enter the home versus with a non-destructive method versus blowing the doors off the hinges, grandma's going to be a whole lot happier about that than the other way around. And so are all the relatives and everybody else. And that actually turned into a lot of work, because now I'm the face of, they tie locksmithing and lock related things to me. And guess who's at that training portion? I mean, just some basic how to open cars, under the door tool, just some basic maintenance type stuff. The maintenance facility managers are there. And then that turns into, well, hey, can you take a look at this? And, oh, you do doors, and now you do door closers and ADA door operators. I mean, we're talking about thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars worth of work that has been generated from that. Not to mention, when people do call the police department and it's not an emergency and there's not a life at risk, who do you think they're going to recommend? Probably the guy that was there trying to give them a little taste of what it is that we do and educate them in a professional manner to go ahead and do so. But now we're recommended. I mean, that's
Absolutely
a great marketing opportunity.
Yeah, well, and having that backing of if the police department or the fire department or whoever, even when they're off duty, right? If they recommend you to someone, people are going to take that recommendation to heart. They trust these folks, they trust us, to do our jobs and do them professionally. And so if I'm out here saying, hey, this guy's a reputable locksmith, in my fire helmet, right, people are going to listen to that. We have a lot of public trust for good reason, and people value those recommendations.
It's way better than a Google review.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. Although my Google is actually up and running, so
that's good.
Wood to knock on, but it is actually up and running. So, that's but I just didn't take no for an answer on that.
Right. So go ahead and walk us down that path a little bit. So where exactly are you right now, and where do you want to be? What's your vision? What's your plan for the next 2 to 5 years?
Sure. So right now I'm, one-man shop, and I'm operating just as a mobile locksmith, right? So I've got all my stuff runs in my car. I've got a Freeman number 2 that I plug in my garage, or I actually have a little power bank I can plug it into in the back of my 4Runner, and I'll run it back there. And I've just been running out of whatever I have to work with, and kind of developing it out that way. My goal has not been to be the lockout guy. I don't have a whole lot of interest in waking up at 2 a.m. on days off. I would do that enough at work. But that's
to give a price too, by the way. Oh, yeah. $300. We'll come by at 9. Yeah, thanks for waking me up.
Yeah, that stings a little bit. So I try to avoid it when I can. But so I've been targeting a lot of commercial stuff, light commercial, right? There's a few companies in the area that I've helped out with stuff. And I've just been kind of growing it organically at the moment. Next steps are going to be doing things like joining the Chamber of Commerce, networking with realtors, and starting to grow the business that way. My eventual goal is to develop it to a point where I can have, between 1 and 5 employees, and I can continue to work my regular job, and I can have a full-time operating shop somewhere. That would be my hopeful goal. My pessimistic option is I just do this for a while and keep doing it like this until it doesn't work anymore. But it's I like to aim high, and if it doesn't work, I'll figure something else out. That's what I'm good at.
Right. Yet another great opportunity for the association to offer how to start with employees, what it's going to be like to get your first employee, what kind of insurance, and all these other things that you need. Wouldn't it be great to have that as a roadmap on that as a resource? All of a sudden, that yearly fee of over $200 really starts to come into play.
Mm-hmm. No, absolutely. That's there's a number of different associations for different trade groups that are out there, and I think we as ALOA are not offering as much value for that membership as we could be, at relatively little increased cost to the organization. I mean, that's obviously got to be a consideration, right? I don't expect everything for free all of the time and infinite resources, but I do think there's a really cool opportunity here. That there's a ton of resources. There's stuff that, I mean, I've been doing this for a couple of years now, and I'm still not anywhere near where I would consider myself to be, full-time professional, ready to take on whatever job you hand me by any means. I'm not at the level I would like to be at, and I want the resources to get there. But as of right now, there isn't a whole lot available to me. So unfortunately, I've just been kind of, very gradually growing and building it up, and it's working. But boy, I would sure love to jumpstart that.
Right. Well, I mean, it could work. It's symbiotic with the association. They would generate more income by offering the on-demand platform. Hey, you get a call from the school or the fire department or whatever, and they're like, hey, we've got some bad hinges. Okay, well, what's the best resource for that? Well, how about installing a continuous hinge and an exit device on here? Okay, well, you log on to the program, you log into ALOA, and then for $99, you can have an on-demand 4-hour seminar on how to install that continuous hinge. Wouldn't you jump all over that? By the time you order the part and it shows up, you've already been educated on how to do it. And now you feel confident enough, you can walk into that job confident and execute it. The association made some money. The instructors made some money. You put money in your pocket, and everybody wins. Again, I'm all about the win-win-win. If every single party wins, why are we not taking more advantage of that?
You can also learn how to install security systems, including access control and alarm monitoring systems like this here, offered by Halo Pulsar through ALOA. This is an easy way how to get started in surveillance and camera installation via these wireless cameras that install securely into your home and your customer's home. You can definitely enter the career starting with these systems. Check out the link below.
Oh, absolutely. I've bought tools before after I've talked to someone on the phone and they say, hey, I need XYZ done. And I go, let's see. Okay, I was looking at a catalog the other week. Yeah, I can do that. Sure. I order the part, I order the tool and the part and do the job. And I'm not, it's not a bad way to go, honestly. And for education, why not, right? Why couldn't we do that? There's awesome opportunities out there that there are things that I've turned down that I said, you know what, I'm not comfortable with my skills in this area enough to take on a job like this. But I'll refer you to somebody. And thankfully I've developed a relationship with an automotive shop up the way who does a lot of really good automotive key work. And so if somebody calls me for a car thing, I go, hey, why don't you talk to these guys? But, there are plenty of opportunities that I could take on with that just-in-time education that could really benefit me. And like I say, help springboard that progress and make things go a little faster for me.
I like turbocharging everything, right? We have the resources, and since COVID, if we got anything out of COVID, it was the gift had to be a whole new level of communication, Zoom, education platforms, YouTube, all of these different things. We just need to put those pieces together to make the puzzle that we want out of it. And everything is there. We just need people that know how to organize it and put it into play and put it into effect. And I think I have some really good plans to do that. And talking with more people like yourself, I'm sure this interview and this podcast is going to help a ton of people. How much would this podcast have helped you out if you would have been able to watch this 4 or 5 years ago,
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, finding resources online is one thing, SE Lock and Key is another one that comes to mind.
Yeah,
These guys out there, they do awesome work out there, and it's great. But you're kind of watching it with a critical eye, going, is this guy teaching me something that I actually want to know, or is this somebody teaching me something that isn't actually going to work the way I think it is? And
Right.
Jason does a very nice job. But I'm not picking on him by any means, but
Oh no, he does great.
there are definitely some high quality content providers out there, but there's a lot of slop as well. And particularly with the advent of AI,
Right. Yeah, it's a whole new thing, a wild, wild west. But yet again, here's where the association needs to adopt and figure out how to use these tools and bring these tools. I mean, a hammer is a hammer, right? We can either build a house or we can bonk somebody over the head. The hammer's still the tool. It doesn't have any feelings about how it's being used. Let's use AI. Let's use these different platforms, and let's really build something amazing together and help the next generation, because they're the ones that really count. Like, the reason that I really try and give back to this industry, trust me, there's no glory in being a board member. It is a lot of time spent away from my business. It's all volunteer. There's absolutely no pay involved. There's nothing really as a benefit other than I get to give back to the community that has helped me so much. And that's where I find the value in it. And that's where I find the passion. I do what I do because when I see somebody's eyes light up when I'm teaching a locksmith fundamentals class or the fundamentals of locksmithing class, that's a week-long beginner education program, and I see them connect the dots, that's why I do it. That exact reason right there. That's where my passion comes from, is I love to watch people learn, and I love to see them learn the correct way in the correct environment with the correct people, so that they're not getting the garbage that's on YouTube, that's that 80 or 90% that's just not useful to anybody and actually harmful. In fact, is quite harmful in some applications.
No, absolutely. That's to piggyback off of that. That's the one other thing that I have a lot of time doing is education, and I do a lot of training and education. Most of it is emergency medicine. I'm a paramedic licensed, and so I do a ton of emergency medical education. I would love to, as time goes on, reach a point where I feel comfortable enough with my skill set to pass that on to other folks, and to be able to do it through a platform, through the industry association rather, to help better that industry back again. I mean, that's an awesome opportunity. And, being able to help people to climb that ladder and get to that next level, it's huge, because you're going to really not just affect the one person you're teaching, but you're going to affect their customers, their family, their friends, people they later mentor. That was one of the things that one of my instructors taught me when I was learning how to be a paramedic, was you can be a paramedic and you can save a couple lives. You can be an instructor and you can teach hundreds of people how to save lives, and it's the same thing for locksmithing, right? Like, you can unlock one door and you've unlocked one door, but you teach 100 people how to unlock a door, and all of a sudden that effect just compounds.
Yeah, and how to do it professionally and show up in a uniform with photo ID and have, marked vehicles and have all these other things that really just kind of connects the dots. I don't think people realize, we as locksmiths don't really realize how do I say it? People are trying to connect dots, and they're trying to figure out, is this guy legitimate, or is this a scam, or does he know what he's even doing? Like, the people are very, very skeptical. So, like showing up in a marked vehicle, I know some people don't have a marked vehicle and they're okay. It's just one of the arrows in the quiver here, but that's a dot, that's a check mark, especially when you go into like a domestic violence situation. You've already got a very elevated emotional state customer right there. And then you get out and you've got professional shirts on. It's not ratty old jeans and a holy old t-shirt. Do you have a photo ID that ALOA gives me? I have a fire door inspection badge. I've got an ALOA badge, photo ID, clipped directly on me. Do I have some tools? Do I ask questions that sound intelligent? And do I just get started and know that it looks like I know what I'm doing? People are subconsciously connecting all of those dots. And as soon as you can connect, the more dots you can connect quicker, the more at ease they're going to feel. And the more at ease they feel, the better the better whole situation they're going to have, experience that they're going to have. And then they're going to have an even better reaction to that and write a good review and say, hey, locksmiths are great. How many people are getting scammed and they have a sour taste in their mouth? Oh, locksmiths are just a bunch of scammers, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's not the case. We have the opportunity to rebuild those bonds and rebuild the bond with the public. And it all starts with professionalism, integrity, and ethics. That's what we really need to focus on. That's what the association needs to focus on. And that's what we as instructors need to focus on as well. So
absolutely. Well, and to tag onto that was one of the jobs that I won. I bid against a few other folks. This particular company had called around a little bit, and they bid myself and a couple of other locksmiths in the area. And I went into the job, and very long story short, they had 2 different sets of doors, and they were expecting 2 different keys for those sets of doors. And I said, hey, what if we just mastered this and you have one key that opens both doors? And they went, oh, you can do that? And I said, yeah, absolutely you can. And there were other professional locksmiths that quoted this job against me and didn't offer that as an option. And I talked to him later after the job was done, and I said, hey, out of curiosity, how did my bid come in? Because I'm starting out, I'm new, I want to learn. And he very kindly pulled out the other bids and said, actually, you were on the high end, but we went with you because you knew what you were talking about.
Right.
And that's exactly. He said you understood our needs and you addressed our concerns in a way that made us understand that you knew what you were doing. And that was what got me that job. That's a decent chunk of change for income for me that I would not have gotten if I walked in there and went, okay, I'll cut you a key or 2 and yep, see you later. It just really speaks to that. It's that level of professionalism and understanding the problem and really listening to your customers. That's like you mentioned earlier, that we're not in the locksmithing business. We're in the problem solving business, and we solve problems related to locks and doors. That's really what we're doing here. And so the better you can understand that customer's concern or their problem, and they may not even know it themselves. Sometimes you have to dig it out of them. But
right.
As soon as you can uncover that core problem and address it, all of a sudden they start to realize, oh, this person does know what they're talking about, and they're interested in helping me, and they have my best interest at heart. And that's I think the real key to it.
Absolutely. It comes down to communication, and guys like you and me, we're the secretary. We answer the phone. We're the communicator. We have to communicate. What problems do you have? And start extracting information from somebody who doesn't even know how to explain what the actual problem is in technical terms. We have to be the locksmith to actually solve the problem. Then we have to be the bookkeeper and write up the invoice. And we have to be all of these things. And those are all individual skills that a lot of people only focus on one aspect of. And we have to kind of be this jack of all trades as small business owners. And I really think that there's so much opportunity to help people out with that. The business classes, how to build invoicing, how to use electronic invoicing, how to communicate with customers better, how to understand their needs. And it's not just, okay, you need a rekey. Great, I'm going to do that. And I'm going to be a robot. You need to have some communication skills if you want to land those jobs. And it's 2025. The bar is being raised and the competition is getting stiff, and you can't just mutely go about your job and just, be a robot. You have to be friendly. You have to engage the customer. You have to know when that's appropriate. You have to understand and read the room and read the situation as well. And I don't think that's being taught very much right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's even simple things like, cell phones are a great asset for us in this trade, right? I don't have to ask the customer, what does it say on your key? And they have a copy of a copy of a copy, and it doesn't say anything. Hey, take a picture of your key, send it to me. Okay, cool. I know what we're working with here. I had a customer who was competently incompetent, I'll call it. He didn't know what he was doing, but he was trying really hard. And took a picture of the lock that I was supposed to be replacing on the door with a tape measure just kind of next to it on the door to give me a sense of scale. And I said, that's awesome. I love that. Could you please measure from here to the edge of the door? And he did, and I give him credit. But those kinds of things and having those conversations and saying, being able to say to that customer, hey, that was really awesome. I'm glad you did that. Can you just modify it slightly for me? I was able to quote that job remotely, order the correct lock in and replace it. It turned out to be a piece that was no longer in production, and I couldn't get the internals for it. And so I had to replace the whole lock, but I called him and I said, hey, look, this is going to be a really expensive job because we need to replace the whole lock. And I called the manufacturer and I explained to him that they said that particular lock is no longer in production and we can't get parts. And because of course it was, I'm trying to remember I won't pick on the brand, but it was very nice lock on a very nice house. And he had to replace the whole thing and he was disappointed, but he understood. And just like you say, having that communication with that person to say, hey, here's the situation. Here's the things I've tried as your advocate to the company. And here's where I am. And he still awarded me the job. I still got the job done. And they're going to probably be calling me back here shortly for some other locks. But like you say, you could be a robot and just, it's broken. Let me just get you a new lock. And that guy may or may not buy that lock from you. But if you go to the steps of calling the manufacturer, trying to find the parts, can't find the parts, hey, here's the situation, and having that conversation, all of a sudden you build trust and you build a better experience for the customer. And they know that you care and that you're trying to do the best thing for them.
They can tell when you're there to collect a check and when you're there to actually help them and solve their problem. And all home services are problem solving. They have a pain point and you have a solution to the pain point. If you can get the solution to them in the most clear and effective way possible, the price almost starts to not even matter. Like you said, they want it done right, especially when you're playing with security. We're not buying toothpaste here. We're not, hiring some kid to mow the lawn, right? We're hiring somebody to deal with our front door, which needs to work in an emergency to let me out if there's a fire, right? Fire guy. And then you need to keep the bad guy out and maintain the security of myself and my family. Those are pretty high on the list. And it's like the old buy one, get one free LASIK surgery. I'm not going to that one. I want the guy that charges me for both eyes, and I'm going to be able to see when I'm done, right?
Yep.
So good.
Yep, absolutely. No, I had LASIK done, and I did not go to the buy one get one game either. So
not a place for discounts, which is great for us because now we can charge more as professionals. And I preach that over and over again. These guys that are plumbers, electricians, HVAC technicians, mechanics, they're charging a premium rate for their service and their skill set. And there's absolutely no reason we are any different. I put in just as many hours in education, both providing and taking it, both. And as those professions, and there's no reason that I shouldn't be making just as much, if not more than some of those professions. And we can elevate the entire pay scale for everybody in the industry as a whole. That's the way that I really see things moving forward. So.
Absolutely. And another piece of, I'll toss you another bone here as far as something else that ALOA can do is developing a way to price your offerings, because I know a fair number of smaller locksmith shops that are charging what I would say is not enough for the services they're providing. And, they can make their bills and things like that. But the fact of the matter is that if you just start undercutting everything, you're going to end up reaching a point where you really can't undercut anymore and you're not making any money. And it's not, again, we're not here to just make a buck, but you still have to pay your bills. You still have to have the opportunity to do things like go on vacation and take time off and all that kind of stuff. And by undervaluing yourself, you're also undervaluing your colleagues in the industry. And I realize that we can't sit here and all sit at a table and say, what should this cost together? Price risk, I think that's illegal last I checked. But developing a framework for folks to be able to figure out what that skill or what that service is worth, I think would be valuable for folks.
Oh, I absolutely agree. And I believe they do. The association, look for it in the magazines. And you could probably send an email into I'll send you an email with a contact. Yeah. But they do like basic regional pricing. What's the average service call? What's the average hourly rate? What's the average rekey? What's that? And you can use that as a gauge. But I'll tell you right now, I know my competitors price check me, and we understand what people are charging. I intentionally set my rates higher. I want to be the highest. There's going to be a McDonald's and there's going to be a steakhouse at every single city of size. I want to be the steakhouse every single time, because when I'm 65, I don't want to be dead broke. I can't go back and charge those customers more because I didn't charge enough. Vans break down. I can't tell you how many times I've heard the stories where, a guy his transmission goes out in his van, and all of a sudden he's got a GoFundMe account because he didn't put enough money aside to be able to fix a transmission in a van. If you can't do that, you have much bigger problems and you're not charging enough for your services. We have to be able to charge enough to actually be professional, to afford the association fees, to be able to afford the education that we need, to be able to afford all of the insurance and the bonding and all of the other things that come along with it. And people really don't think about that. And you have to retire one day. I mean, I can't tell you the amount of stories that I hear from people. I worked my whole life. And then when it came time to sell, my business wasn't worth what I thought it was going to be. The real estate was down. And, people that were going to walk away with $500,000 end up walking away with $50,000. And that's just not enough to retire on. How scary is that? And now your body's so broken, you can't do it.
Yeah, absolutely. No. And it's being able to be that higher tier of price, in my opinion, is a preferential place to be, because the challenge with being the low bid on things all of the time is that you get the low bid customers, and those are not always the customers that are going to be easy to work with. Those are not always the customers that are going to pay you on time, all of that kind of stuff. I mean, I've been very fortunate with my customers, and I think in part due to some of my pricing, I haven't had those kinds of problems very often. But there are definitely times and places where, in our industry and others, where when you're the low bid, all of a sudden you get the guy who goes, well, why does this cost $12? Well, why does this cost $7? And then all of a sudden you're playing this pricing game and trying to nickel and dime yourself out of a job. And that's not a great place to be. So you can weed some of those folks out by being, if not the top of the tier, at least somewhere in the middle.
Yeah. I've had to fire many a customer, and guess what I gained out of that? I made room for a better quality of customer. And as a business owner, I think people forget that. And I really hope that people remember you are in control. You do not have to do work for clients who don't pay on time, who are always trying to nickel and dime you, who are always trying to get an extra something out of you for free. But wait, there's more. This isn't Billy Mays here with OxyClean, man. I got stuff I got to do. I quoted you a price. And, if you said that you have 2 locks to rekey and you end up having 15, well, that's not fair to my other customers. I'm going to have to come back, and I'm going to have to charge you another service call to come back to do the full scope of work, because you didn't inform me about the entire task and the entire project. So,
yep, absolutely.
That's more business stuff. But we're coming up on a little bit over an hour here. This has been a great podcast. I really appreciate you, Tim. If you were to talk to younger you, or for those people that are on the fence right now, what is the number one thing you would tell them? What's the number one piece of advice you have for them right now?
I think the biggest hurdle in any industry, but in particular this one, is getting started. So find what that bar is you need to clear to get started and do it. You can sit there and worry that you might not have this, you might not have that, or you might not know this, or you might not know that. You can do that until you're 65, and I really wish I would have tried that. The worst thing you can do is sit there and wonder if you can try it. Just get out there, start trying it. If you're not confident or not comfortable, find a way to get there, reach that bar that you need to reach for yourself, and do it. And that's the biggest thing for me. It's when I finally got into doing this, I kind of realized that, the hardest part was just getting started. And now that I'm here, it's much easier to keep going. But yeah, that initial jump, that's just take the jump, take the leap, go for it, try it. Worst case, it doesn't work out, you try something else.
Right. And like you said, you're in a position right now, you could walk away from it all, and you could go right back to doing your normal job as a firefighter. And thank you for your service, by the way. We need more people like you that help protect the community. I really, really appreciate that, and the service that you've provided as well. So for those people out there that are on the fence, take it from Tim. Take that first step. Take a class. Take some action step, and build a business plan. Your first step could quite literally be just writing out your business plan so that you can see your vision of where you do want to be in the future.
Yep. Develop those bullet points, work it out, and you'll figure it out, and you'll learn a whole lot along the way that you never even thought you needed to learn.
That's great. That's great, Tim. Hey, let me ask you a question. What do you think of the Quickset Smart Key?
Quickset Smart Key. Boy, I have seen a lot of broken ones. So I'm not a super huge fan of them. I think the concept sounds great on paper, and I think some engineer is probably very proud of the development job he did on that.
Right.
But I think it's got a few too many vulnerabilities and a few too many failure points for me to be super thrilled about putting it on a customer's door.
Right. What about when you run into one in the field right now? Is that a good day or not so good day for you?
I don't have too much of a problem with them. I'm fortunate. One of my colleagues here in the area, he actually has the camera for those.
Mm-hmm.
And so if I'm in a pinch, I can borrow one from him. And then I also have the bypass tool for that. So I've got a few ways to get around that. But
That's great. Some updates. The new Generation 5, the camera does not work on all the way. So that's something to look out for. For being a guest here today, I'm going to give you access to my free training program of the QuickSet Smart Key Killer class that gives you 15 different ways to both bypass that non-destructively and some nuclear options if you have a total and complete failure. Because like you said, there's a lot of moving parts. There's a lot of things going on in there. So that is my gift from me to you today. And I hope you can put that to use. And thank you again for being on the show today. We really appreciate it. We'll hopefully we'll do a follow-up in a year or two and see where you're at.
Yeah, that would be great
for everybody.
Appreciate it. Thank you, Wayne.
Mm-hmm. Yep. All right. Thanks, Tim. Have a great day.
You too.
Yep.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
For more information on the QuickSet Smart Key Defeat class that we just offered Tim, and who found that very, very interesting and actually profitable for his business, check out the link below. You can tell that we've done impressioning. I give 15 different ways to defeat this lock, including the Lock Tech camera tool, along with leashy decoding and picking this lock, along with many other methods. Check out the link below for your QuickSet Smart Key Defeat class.
Welcome to the Locksmith Security Network. LSN is your powerful resource, hosted by Wayne Winton for all things locksmith and security.